guy was super creepy.
Shaw of Fear 25-man Heroic was seen at the time as being one of the hardest bosses Blizzard had ever made. However, as we'll see here over the next couple of minutes, the fight itself isn't mechanically complicated, but the real stress comes with a few one-shotty mechanics and just the incredible length of the fight, particularly when gear is not in our favor. The clips that we're going to be using today as a demonstration of the visuals come from the perspective of a main tank, which was recorded roughly when this fight first came out, so it is subject to change based on Blizzard's decisions on the PTR. For example, this fight was famously 25 or something minutes long on its first kill on 25-man Heroic, yet it's worth noting that some things were changed by Blizzard very shortly after that could be already implemented changes when we see it in our version. Getting into the fight itself, the boss has a phase 1 that on normal is the whole fight, and in Heroic we get a bonus phase 2. That is to say, on normal this should be the fight in its entirety from 100 to 0%. On Heroic, we will likely see this part of the fight go from 100% of the boss to 66% of the boss's life remaining. However, it is worth noting, on launch, originally this phase lasted till 50%. To start, the Shah himself stays in the center of the map, and if nobody's currently engaged with him in a tanking position, it will lead to a wipe. So a tank has to stand in the Lightwell-like ground effect that is beside the boss. Doing so will activate that slice of the platform as a safe haven from his main ability, which is Breath of Fear. Every 30 seconds, when his energy bar fills up, he will do a massive amount of shadow damage to anyone in the platform who is not in that safe slice or has an invulnerability of some capacity. The good news is that this slice of the ground is a consistent place throughout the phase, and also there's plenty of room to spread out and deal with mechanics for ranged and healers. The challenge for this mechanic is simply that melee will have to be outside of this slice, attacking the boss from behind until the breath is about to come out, and then you quickly have to enter the safe zone, be safe from the breath, and then exit again to get to your more optimal DPS position. Healers should note that in this phase 1, every 3 attacks the boss does, his 4th attack is 3 total attacks, and so it creates a pattern of attack, 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 big attack. Within this slice of safety, it's important that range and healers have a light spread in the space because of an ability called Eerie Skull. Simply put, he'll spam at the raid high shadow damage to random raiders and anyone within 2 yards of them, and so by being spread, that doesn't spread to other people. The last major mechanic that exists on this platform specifically are the terror spawns. These are adds which will spawn in random locations outside of the current safe slice, typically 2 at a time, and these guys stay in place and continuously spam the ability Penetrating Bolt at locations underneath raiders. These shots are visualized by blue radiations underneath players, and when you see that under you, you must move. And as the fight continues on in phase 1, more and more of these terror spawns appear, which increases the number of these constant Penetrating Bolt ground effects. And so as the time progresses, we're just going to have to dip and dodge more and more of these abilities because you can't just plant and take them. It's just too much damage. Consider them temporary zone denial that you're constantly dodging within the safe space. Now, these spawns are killable, but they have the same shield ability that we saw in Will of the Emperor, where they always face the shield towards the raid, and so you must be on the opposite side of the terror spawn to actually be able to hurt them. This causes extreme problems because that means you will have to be in the danger zone. So there are 2 ways to deal with these terror spawns: either ignore them or actively try to kill them to simplify this movement in the safe zone. Historically, the decision was simply to ignore them. The risk of killing them is too high, as well as the time and damage output it takes to kill them is too much. So we simply have to continuously dodge their abilities and just get through the phase to 66%. Final mechanic that is involved in this pre-heroic phase part of the fight is the side platform mechanic. That is, there are 3 platforms in the map outside of the main platform, and every so often One of the tanks and a number of other raiders will be randomly selected to be taken to a side platform. When you're dropped off at the platform, your goal is to kill the panda mob in the center. It stays in the middle of the platform and continuously does a series of spatial abilities that you must dodge to stay alive while trying to kill him. Once he's dead, a clickable teleporter appears in the center of the platform and it takes you back to the main space. Notably, when you do successfully kill the panda and you take that teleport, you're provided a temporary buff on your character that gives you some damage buff, but also invulnerability to the Shah of Fear's breath, which will allow you a safe passage to the current safe slice, and theoretically the ability to kill the terrors that have spawned, but we're going to ignore them. The panda abilities are the following. First, they are tankable, so the tank should pick up the mob. Its default ability is a simple shoot, and so you can tank the mob from ranged. Second, he'll place Shah globes around him. These must be picked up in 8 seconds when they spawn to stop him from self-healing 5% of his health per orb that lasts more than 8 seconds. Picking up an orb does a notable amount of damage to the person who did pick it up, and so this is kind of like the tank mechanic, where while they're tanking the boss and dodging the abilities that we'll talk about next, they are simply constantly collecting the orbs. The last two abilities this panda does are movement related. The easiest of these is Death Blossom. The boss will start channeling the ability, and it's up to the raiders to run to the edge of the room and hide behind a pillar. If you're behind a pillar, you take no damage. It's possible for the tank of the platform to stay in the space and continue to collect their Shah globes, but be careful to not overdo it and die. Yet the true challenge of these side platforms is Dread Spray, which is a random volley he directs every 8 seconds. It does 2 shots per second in each direction, and a player will be feared if hit by 2 shots within the same channel of Dread Spray. The fear itself is dispellable, although in Heroic, these shots are so powerful that it's very likely the person who's hit by these is just killed outright. Now, the patterns of these shots are not random, in that each individual side platform has its own pattern that it'll always do every single time you do this fight. But there are 3 unique patterns because there are 3 different platforms. So either we have to memorize the pattern as seen here, or Blizzard allows add-ons to dynamically tell us where the safe spots are, which is how they did it in original MoP. You can see this here in this included clip to the bottom and right. That is a live dynamic mapping of the Dread Spray. We'll see what they let us do. So assuming all this comes together and everybody does their job, we'll hit 66% life on the boss, and phase 2, the heroic only phase, will start. It's important to note that this phase 2 occurs for the rest of the fight. When you take this new version of the Shah's health down to 0%, the fight is done. Phase 2 is just a repeating set of different abilities that we'll cover that ramps in difficulty as you try to distribute your time damaging things that are the boss and things that aren't the boss. First, his default attack is slightly more powerful, where on his 4th attack it counts for 5 hits. The boss also does a frontal cone, which just means that the tank of the time has to dodge his cone when it happens. In addition, tanks will have to taunt swap whenever the current tank gets naked and afraid. In terms of ground effects, there are 2 things that raiders have to move away from. First is Water Spout, wherein occasionally the ground will have icons that suggest where a jet of water will rise out. Move away from this icon when you see it. Otherwise, 1.5 seconds later, you'll take a bunch of explosion damage. The other environmental consideration is that every 1 minute the boss will submerge, and this is based on his energy bar tick up. He'll disappear underground and then reappear in a random new location somewhere near the raid after a few seconds. Clouds on the ground will indicate this location, and anyone who's standing in that space will take a huge amount of frost damage 12 yards around near that new spot. Yet the real challenge of this phase 2 is the following mechanics. When we start phase 2, the last main tank will be given a buff called Pure Light. When a player has Pure Light, they are given immunity to fears and horrors, 30% damage reduction, and they have the ability to pass this buff to another targeted player using an extra action button. So what is this useful for? First, there's an ability that the boss will do every so often called Huddle and Terror, where he will horrify some raiders, fearing them in place, and give them a large amount of ticking shadow damage every second for 12 seconds. If they are not cleansed of this ability, they will die. However, they cannot be cleansed by a raider in this fashion other than being passed Pure Light by the current person who has Pure Light. So when Huddle in Terror occurs, whoever has Pure Light has to quickly hand it off to someone who's been feared in this manner, and they then have to pass it off and then pass it off so that every instance of Huddle of Terror can be quickly and efficiently removed. But more importantly, the mechanic of the Dread Spawn. Every time the boss submerges, it's a new round of Dread Spawns. At first, it's just one Dread Spawn. It'll come from the edge of the map, and its threat table is solely based on who currently has the Pure Light. If the spawn touches the person with Pure Light, it's an instant death. And when the Pure Light is swapped, every current spawn casts Shaw Spine, which is a raid-wide damage hit. This stops raids from spamming Pure Light swaps to avoid taking damage. However, the longer one individual has Pure Light on them, the faster the spawns get with a buff called Gathering Speed. And so we are forced to do swaps of Pure Light, not too little, not too much. To handle this mechanic, we will have 3 players be assigned a position in a triangle pattern. When a submerge happens, we'll make sure to have the Pure Light on one of those 3 players. The Dreads will spawn at the edge of the map and slowly walk towards that player. Just before the spawns touch the player and kill them, they will throw the Pure Light to one of their 2 other partners in the pattern. We'll then continuously play hot potato between these players as long as they're alive. However, the goal of the fight is to drop the boss's health down, and there are times where he's submerged, so our goal is to do enough cleave and casual damage on the adds that when the boss does submerge, we can all swap to the spawns that are still alive and quickly kill them off just in time such that they die when the next version of the Shaw spawns from his submerge. This becomes a long-form balancing act from the start of the fight of Phase 2, where there's only one spawn, to the end, where we're probably dealing with 9 or 10 spawns. At first, we may just casually cleave the one ad and then quickly kill it off, but at the end, we'll have more and more people permanently dedicated to killing off these ads so that we efficiently maximize our damage time on the boss. This mechanic is why this boss historically took like 25 minutes when it first was killed, because the gear on the players killing it for the first time was just not good enough to take care of all the ads and efficiently kill the boss. In the last 5 to 10 minutes of those extended attempts, they were barely doing 1 or 2% boss damage between these cycles of dreads. So it is our hope, with gained experience and hopefully better itemization usage, that we can sneak out more damage than they did back then and kill this boss without having to spend almost half an hour on it.